Great.
Thank you.
Right, so thank you everyone for your patience in this regard, and now we'll move on to the Christchurch Northern Corridor Downstream Effects Mitigation Plan, items 16 and 17, which we'll deal with together, and if we could have staff at the end of the table, and I think it might be quite useful just from the outset for context in terms of the decision that we're being asked to make today. If staff could take us through the designation conditions that require this process that we're in to occur, and perhaps pick up on the issue that Councillor Jones, Community Board Chair Ellie Jones raised, which is the issue of the traffic demand management, and whether that can be part of an engagement so that people can see that it's not either or, it's and.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, that the Christchurch Northern Corridor has been approved under the Resource Management Act and is being constructed and is due to open in mid-2020. Now, as part of that approval process, the conditions of the designation require that prior to operating the Christchurch Northern Corridor, Council needs to implement the Downstream Effects Management Plan to address any downstream effects relating to the traffic arising from the Christchurch Northern Corridor. So that the draft plan that you have in front of you today has been prepared in accordance with those designation conditions. The reason for the conditions is that when the CNC opens, the Christchurch Northern Corridor, there is potential for considerably more traffic to be using Cranford Street than there is now. The draft Downstream Effects Management Plan suggests a range of measures to mitigate these, such as upgrades to intersections and clearways, as well as traffic calming on local streets to stop rat running. Given that the Christchurch Northern Corridor is due for completion in mid-2020, it is important, we consider it important that we consult with the community now so that staged interventions can be in place by the time it opens. Now, it may seem from people who are reading the draft Downstream Effects Management Plan that that's the only work that has been done. It's not, particularly around travel demand management measures. So there's actually 3 other work streams that the Council was engaged in. We're not necessarily leading those, but we're involved in them. So the first one that you would be aware of is the high occupancy vehicle lane, and that's work that's been done by the New Zealand Transport Agency. And that's the concept of having one of the lanes for when the Christchurch Northern Corridor opens being used for high occupancy vehicles, such as more than one person, 2, 3, 4 people or more. And that would likely start just on the tram road, so just north of the bridge, travel south all the way down the what used to be called the Northern Arterial to QE2 Drive, and continue on after QE2 Drive to just north of the Cranford Street intersection. So that's a specific measure that NZTA are looking at, and again the purpose of that is to reduce the number of vehicles coming into Christchurch. So they, at the moment, they have approved the business case to sort of pursue it further, but they're still yet to make a decision on funding. I believe they'll be making that decision in March. So they're leading that work stream because it principally relates to their piece of the network, although some of it is ours. The second piece of work that has been done is a sub-regional, or to do with the the UDS area, a business case around travel demand management. And so that looks at mechanisms such as park and ride, HOV lanes across the entire sub-region. And there's a specific focus on the north, given that that is the area which we're going to feel the most pressure on, because the Christchurch Northern Corridor is looking to open in mid-2020. So the issues that will be considered as part of that study would be something like a park and ride in Waimakariri. So that's not something that we're responsible for, but logically that would be the place if you're going to consider any travel demand management measures where that would occur. It will also look at high frequency bus routes, potentially using the Christchurch Northern Corridor, so you could get rapid bus service down there. So there's a range of things that would look at, but that work is being done at the same time. The other work stream that Council was involved in, and this is all with the other relevant urban development strategy partners such as WIMAC, NZTA and ECAN, because it involves all of them, is the PT Futures business case. So as part of the package of work that we're looking at around public transport, there may be high frequency or rapid buses using the Christchurch Northern Corridor, but there could also be, that one of the benefits of the Northern Corridor is to reduce the amount of traffic down Main North and Papanui Road, and that frees up that route for bus services, so that's something that we're looking at as well. So there is a suite of other kind of work streams which are being done, and they will complement the work being led by Dr. Shane Turner to my left around the Downstream Effects Management Plan. So in terms of the consultation requirements of the Downstream Effects Management Plan, we need to be quite specific that we're going to do that in accordance with the designation conditions, but I think we can refer to those other work streams that are underway, and we've heard loud and clear as staff the concerns raised by the residents through the petition that was lodged with Council today, and I can assure them that those issues that they want us to consider are being considered, and we will consider them through those work streams.
No worries. In terms of the, Richard mentioned a notice of requirement conditions that came out of the CNC notice of requirement decision, and when you look at those conditions, they are very focused on what you do with the vehicles that arrive in Cranford Street and St Albans, that area of the city. And so, one approach would have been just to focus on what we could do and where we should put the cars, where we don't want the cars to go. But based on the community feedback and also my own experience, because I live in that community, there are a lot of other impacts other than just what we do with the cars. So those cars will impact on walking, cycling, and access to different facilities in the community. So I've tried to develop a plan that not only looks at what we can do to mitigate some of the congestion from that additional traffic, but also tries to mitigate the safety and particular impacts of that additional traffic that will come through the community. And in terms of the TDM, again, Richard covered that in a lot of detail. I see TDM as something that you apply across the city or apply in a particular commuter corridor. So at the very least it should include looking at what happens in the Waimac district as well as Northern Christchurch, and that seems to be the case that Christchurch City are working with Waimac to look at how they can reduce the number of cars coming into the city, and I'm strongly in support of doing that. Within the actual corridor that we're talking about, really it's restricted more to what infrastructure needs to be provided to try and support that, and that's where the HOV lane down the CNC, if it does go ahead, will help in a lot of ways trying to reduce traffic coming through the area. So as we'll be trying to make it safer for cycling by putting in some secondary cycle routes as recommended in my report. So yeah, I have listened to the community. As I say, I live in the community, so I cycle and walk in the community myself, and I try to develop a strategy that addresses as many of the traffic effects as we can. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. Richard, you mentioned the sub-regional business case around travel demand management. Does the St Albans community in particular have an opportunity to feed into that? Is there any consultation process around that?
So that I'd have to check. That's been led by the agency, and so what we've done to try and bring these 4 work streams together is set up what we call a program steering group of all the relevant employees of the organisations, and we've got a steering group of people who do the technical work. Yeah. That's been led by NZTA. I'd need to speak to them about that. So can I?
I'd appreciate it if you would, because what I've heard, you talk about park and ride, but I've heard from the community, a lot of them they support park and ride in Waimakariri and Kaipō if necessary, but also suggestions of one around QE2 Drive. And it's not silly in my view either, because people have the opportunity to either leave their car there and possibly park and bike, or park and ride, and that means that if they had an evening function or something in the city, it's easy to whip out there on a bus, pick up your car and come back into town. It's not too far. That's one question. The second one is that, Dr. Tuna, you have preferred options in the report. And this might be more a question for Richard again, what is the process around those preferred options? And you recommend that they be begun, the design on those be begun fairly quickly, because they're going to be needed whether or not the CNC goes ahead, because the traffic is increasing anyway. So what is the process around those preferred options?
So in terms of the process, we've gone, as Community Board Member Jones mentioned, we've gone beyond what's required of us through the designation conditions. Yeah. We did an initial round of consultation last year to elicit responses which fed into Shane's, Dr. Turner's draft report. We're then doing this round of consultation which seeks response from the community on the report per se, and then as Council does with any transport projects, we engage on them either individually or as a suite. Now I think for this set, if Council were to approve the final report, we would then likely go, well, if it's similar to what Dr. Turner's recommending in his report, in his draft report, there would be a suite of projects that we'd consult on as a whole.
So there's no intention to fast track those preferred options
before
any of the rest of the engagement has occurred, or will it be part of it?
Well, we can't do any of them without approval of Council, so we can't actually construct anything, and there's still our Local Government Act obligations to consult on those projects. So just as we do on any other project, we'd still go out and say we want to upgrade one of the intersections, and we'd go out and consult with the local community on what that would look like. I think for this one we should probably go out with all of the interventions if the final report is approved, and do it as a package of consultation, but we haven't got to that stage as yet.
This is just so complex, because we have a report here, and then within that we have preferred options that are recommended to be advanced because there's an imminent need for something. However, we're talking to the community, we want to hear from them about what they see about the whole thing. So we're seeing it all being presented as one package, but then preferred options within that. So it is complicated.
It is complicated.
I suppose that it'll merge once we begin the engagement, the next feedback stage with the community. Is that correct?
The ones that we would look to consult on, if the Downstream Fixed Management Plan is approved by Council, are those ones that we'd look to have implemented by the time the Christchurch Northern Corridor opens, which is the middle of next year. So, but there's a suite of other recommendations in the report as well for the next 3 years after that, and leading up to 2031. So we wouldn't probably engage on those ones which are sitting out into the future. Our thinking is that it would only be on the immediate ones that we would look to construct prior to the CNC opening mid next year.
A bit of sifting and prioritising in a time frame.
They're all outlined in the executive summary of Dr. Turner's report. Stage 1 projects.
Yeah.
on page 10, which lists projects and studies to be undertaken before the CNC opens. So if that list were to make its way through to the final, and if it was approved version of the report, we would probably consult on them as a suite of projects, because they are all interlinked.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just a few questions. I guess half the problem we've got is the fact that a lot of the travel demand management tools that have been looked at are kind of invisible to the community. So then they're obviously seeing the downstream effects part of it and the plan that's gone out, but actually the work that council's doing, trying to look at options to actually reduce the vehicles, is slightly invisible, and it would appear that it's all working in silos. I guess it's how we can, moving forward, make sure that we really have great focus on actually the mitigation, the reduction of vehicles going onto the Cranford Street from the get-go.
So I don't think we're working in silos at all.
No, but it gives the appearance that you're working in silos if one part of it is basically invisible to the communities that are affected.
The HOV lane's been pretty well advertised and has been through a process through the partnership that was started a wee while ago, and that work is ongoing by the agency. So, but all I can say is that we do have a steering group to manage these 3 or 4 work streams, and we're working closely with WIMAC, NZTA, and with Environment Canterbury on that.
Okay. So obviously there's been modelling done that sort of shows how many vehicles there will be once the corridor opens. Has that modelling looked at actually if we put in some of these travel demand management options, what that would decrease to?
NZTA, I understand, have done some modelling of the HOV lane and in terms of what the effect would be downstream, but the assessment that we've actually done of the downstream effects does assume that at least the 3rd lane across the bridge is an HOV lane. So we've already kind of taken that into account in the actual modelling. So the amount of traffic that our modelling is estimating does take into account that HOV lane will be in place. But if it's not put in place, then there'll potentially be even more traffic.
Yes, but no other kinds of TDMs that could have been, like extending the HOV lane and public transport lane all the way down to Innes potentially, or going right through to Beeley, just trying to look at other options, congestion charges, the park and rides, all these things that actually would encourage people not to just drive their cars into Christchurch by themselves, but actually carpool, use public transport, other methods that actually could have got to the corridor to a point where it hit Innes Road actually didn't have a major impact, and therefore we wouldn't have to spend millions of dollars trying to actually mitigate the impacts.
So the report does recommend investigating extending the southern HOV lane from the CNC to Beeley Ave. So that's one of the things that, but we need to do more work on that because it's a reasonably complex tool to put through an urban environment. So rightly it's been recommended for further investigation. And you know, if the report is received by council today and it goes out to consultation and if it's finally approved, that's the work that we would undertake. So that's certainly an option that is potentially open to this council, that you'd have an extension of that HOV lane from the CNC all the way to Beeley Ave.
So the effect would be that instead of having general traffic clearways, you'd have an HOV lane. So you still have to make the changes in terms of the clearways. You just make them HOV rather than general traffic. And you still have to make a lot of the intersection upgrades to accommodate those HOV lanes.
Yeah, so I guess it's looking at all the different options potentially available that could actually get to the point where actually the time it gets to Innes Road, the traffic volumes aren't that bad. I guess another question that came through when you presented to the community board, and we never quite got the answer to it, was obviously we're physically separating the 2 sides of Cranford Street with the raised medium, so there'll be no right turning if you're coming into town until you get to Innes Road, and then with the clearways proposed, there'll be no right turning as well till, I think, Edgware Road. And therefore, you're really, from quite a long distance, you're just leaving Innes Road as the main right turning point. And for us that obviously live in the area know during AM peak, Innes Road is already packed. And so therefore we sort of asked the question around, have we actually looked at the impact on Innes Road for trying to encourage everyone that wants to go west to actually use that point?
Well, we haven't modelled it in detail. As I think I said to the community board, it does probably need to be modelled in detail, but there is only really a short stretch between Innes Road and, say, Roosevelt Road, which a lot of vehicles will perhaps use as an alternative to access that side of Cranford Street. And so it would only be affected if those queues, obviously back from Rutland Street, signals came all the way back to Innes. And there's potential there with the width anyway for you to actually potentially ban some parking to allow vehicles to actually go around any queue and turn left into Roosevelt. So there's some things that you can do perhaps to deal with those concerns that you have.
Thanks.
Phil, Dion?
Thank you for your reports. My question really is, with the work that's been done, Dr. Turner, like, have there already been discussions, say, with NZTA, and I'm just wondering, are they indicating that in fact they could also support the extension of the HOV?
It's probably better directed at Richard, I think, in terms of NZTA discussions.
So we are continuing to work with NZTA on that, so that the initial business case that they've done recommends an HOV lane from Tram Road to just north of the Cranford Street roundabout, with some breaks in between because of the intersections where you avoid safety issues associated with the merge and weave of people driving in and out of the intersections. So that's their recommendation, but that is yet to be approved. The funding for that is yet to be approved by their board, as I understand it. So, but yes, we're working with them about the possibility of kind of continuing it into Cranford Street and then connecting up with the work that Dr. Turner is recommending on his report, which would potentially take it further south into BDF. But I just caution that it is quite complex to do those sorts of things, and there can be some unintended consequences of introducing HOV lanes into urban environments, such as rat running and other things as well, where you get people going down some of the other local streets to avoid it if they're still in a single occupancy vehicle. So
thank you. And so the other part of that too, I guess, was in relation to the park and ride. I presume or assume that we're having discussions with the Waimakariri District Council about that as a possibility.
That's correct. So they are members of the program steering group that we've initiated to manage these different work streams. They do have funding in their LTP, but is certainly towards the end of their LTP. And ECAN are also in the room on those conversations. And again, it's a funding concern for them.
Thanks, Richard.
Dion?
Yeah, most of the questions that I had have been asked, but I've just got one further question around the PT Futures work that you mentioned. Is that just talking about buses?
So my understanding of the PT Futures business case is it's been through the Public Transport Joint Committee and is going up to the NZTA board for approval. And then there's 3 other work streams that stem from it. And it kind of looks at mass transit along a couple of key routes. And those routes are the ones going north and south to, so north to Waimak and south to Selwyn. And mass transit would imply, it might be buses, it might be guided buses, it might be...
Yeah, I mean, I'm asking about, has rail, wanting to ask, has rail been
So that's something that would be considered as part of that business case.
And when would that likely, time-wise, do you have any idea?
I don't have a time frame for that, but I can certainly find it out.
Yeah, I think that might be an interesting conversation there as well.
Sarah?
Getting the volume on, thank you. I've got some questions about the work that's happening in stage 2. So it seems like all of the work that's planned for stage 1 is, nearly all of it, is about the traffic moving through and people moving through the neighbourhoods, and it's not till stage 2, sort of the work that's going to be done after the opening within the 3 years, that we start looking at how the community who live there are accessing their friends' houses, the parks and those kind of things. And it seems that it would be easier to build that infrastructure that you need to enable them to move around the community at the same time as the rest. And I'm wondering if there's been any community mapping gone on at this point in the process?
Well, part of the issue with some of those other changes is it does require quite a lot of discussion with the community, with the schools, with the businesses to actually develop up some of those strategies. And compared with the roading upgrades, which are, they obviously do need to go to the community to consult on those, but what needs to be done is a bit more clear in terms of the intersections that need to be upgraded, the clearways that need to go in. So I'm just being realistic in terms of the timeframes that we just have before the CNC actually opens. Like, I don't have an issue if those projects are brought forward, it's just that they will take some time to develop up. Like, for example, developing a plan for each of those business areas will take a while in terms of consulting with the various businesses.
So, but it's not just about the businesses and the activity centres, it's about how the people in the community walk around their community, the different desire lines within the community, and rather than being the trouble with it, if you like, it's an opportunity to not disrupt the community as much for 3 to 4 years as might happen otherwise. So if that work was able to be brought forward, that would be really good. But also, does it have funding? Is there funding on budget anywhere for the work that's actually around helping the community to move around the new infrastructure that they've got?
I'll leave the funding question to Richard afterwards, but in terms of what we are actually doing for the community, like one of the key things that we're planning in the strategy is to introduce these safe speed areas in most of the communities and local streets around Cranford Street to try and reduce traffic speeds and hopefully discourage people from running in those streets. And we're doing some traffic calming on the worst situations where we think rat running will happen initially. We're also...
Yeah. Can I just agree with the doing for the community? Because at that point, if you're doing those things for the community, it's because we've done something that's negative in the first place. So we're not necessarily enhancing, we're mitigating.
Yeah, unfortunately, we have a lot more additional traffic, so we are mitigating. And the other key element that we're looking at is with each of the upgrades, including the Westminster Cranford Street upgrade, looking at how we make it safer for school children to get to St Albans School. So that's all part of the upgrading of that corridor, putting the new sets of traffic signals in, upgrading those needs to consider how pedestrians and cyclists are going to get across those roads. So again, with the Cranford-Westminster intersection, the upgrade plan there would provide cycle lanes on the Westminster approaches so that people can get across that corridor on a bike. So cyclists, pedestrians, obviously people in the community are going to be, their needs are going to be catered to a degree on some of that stage 1 improvement projects.
So just one last question. We've got lots of maps showing where the key activity centres are, where potential destinations are for people, where the traffic might go. Have we done any community mapping from the community's perspective of where they do go and how they get there? Because that, prior to having this work done and having the infrastructure in place, having that baseline work done to see where the community moves within the community, rather than just making assumptions, would be really useful.
Yes, like in terms of the monitoring, obviously a key element of this study is the monitoring of the traffic volume increases and the impacts on walking and cycling. And so in the baseline we've collected a lot of traffic data, but we're also collecting, or I'm proposing to collect cycle and pedestrian data at a number of key locations, including the Cranford-Westminster intersection. So we are collecting some baseline information. We're not necessarily...
Yeah, I think not just collecting the data and the numbers going past, but actually, I mean, I can feed some stuff in later, but there's some really good toolkits available for getting the community to do the mapping and stuff like that, which might be able to be led by the community boards.
Well, it sounds like a good idea to do that. So yeah, I would encourage a baseline assessment like that.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank
It'll
you.
be, yeah.
Thank you. I've got Aaron, Glenn and Yanni. And Mike again.
So my questions are just around essentially the reducing the single-use cars, and one of the best ways is for high occupancy vehicle or buses to be more successful. And we all know you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it catch a bus. Seems to be the old saying. And with that, when the motorway opens next year, has there been talks of being a bit radical at the start and maybe only allowing for the first week high occupancy vehicles and buses? So do a staggered opening for a week. So obviously to encourage those people that have got more than one in a vehicle to get on there and they get first go at it and get to experience it. And then the other one is, and that would also keep half the load or a percentage of the load on Marston's Road, while Cranford gets used to it and we get to see what it looks like. And the other one would be around the buses, and this would be a bit more radical than normal, but to have express buses that use the motorway coming through, but for the first month have completely free fares. So just really go for a hard out push right at the start.
Aaron, you're making the mistake of creating the same confusion that people who don't understand the separation between the City Council's role and ECAN's role in public transport.
That's what I meant by being radical and actually working together. And
yeah, no, we are working together. We have a joint committee.
There might be a good outcome.
It's a very good idea, but I think it's unfair to create a public impression that it's something that we can decide. It's something that we can certainly submit on. We can ask them to do it, but
Madam Chair, I'm more than happy to have those conversations with both the agency and Environment Canterbury.
Yeah, I think, because I mean, in response to an earlier question, I sort of kind of went online to look at the various public-facing material, and the NZTA material, which is linked off our website, doesn't go into the Christchurch City Council downstream effect stuff, and the downstream effect stuff doesn't link back to NZTA in the sense that it's through a submission sort of channel, a have your say channel. So I think it might be worthwhile talking to the comms team about doing a joined up communication that picks up all of these things, so that the public are very much aware of the, you know, the sort of the you know, the fact that, you know, NZTA's role, ECAN's role and our role, and how it's all coming together, and Waimakariri District Council too as well. But anyway, I've got Glenn, Yanni and Mike.
Thank you. Two quite different questions. The first is about the 30% trigger, if you like, so that, as we've all read the report, over street design or other interventions, etc. So we know that this is not expected until 2031 in many cases, but how much confidence do you have in terms of lead-in time where the growth is greater than expected? We've looked at the traffic modelling, etc. You know, how much confidence can we have that we can nip this in the bud before it overtakes us?
Well, I think the key element of the study is the monitoring before and after, and through the whole first 10 years at least, because we have got the model saying that certain roads will have more than 30% more traffic on it, but there are limitations with these transport models, particularly when you get down to local streets. They're better at forecasting traffic on the major roads. Actually, the decisions people make to rat run, you know, a model doesn't always replicate those well. So, you know, it is really important, particularly for the streets that we think are most likely to get affected, to continue monitoring them annually. And if we see that it's going to trigger that 30%, as the modelling might indicate, or we might even pick up other streets that the modelling didn't indicate where we've got rat running traffic. And the way we pick that up is the public will be complaining about the rat running traffic, no doubt. We will need the council will need a couple of years sort of lead in to actually developing up some some changes, be traffic calming type of changes, or turning restrictions or other things that they need to do. So if the council can see that those roads are getting a lot of additional rat running traffic and will continue to get increased traffic, then they can put in place projects to address those concerns.
So you're thinking 2 years for any unexpected surprises, you know, to put interventions in place?
Well, well, it may be possible to do it quicker than that, but obviously you've got to actually develop up the schemes and then go and talk to the community about those schemes and maybe different options, and to allow you to work your way through that process. It may take that long.
Yeah, and my second quite different question is about the community. I notice on page 297, 298, there's a lot to do in stage 1 before the CNC opens, and I see it developing weekly as a neighbour. It's coming on fast. So how much thought has been given to the actual kind of community engagement methodology? I mean, I look at the consultant's report. I'll bring it up later in debate. I don't actually agree with what he's suggested, but that'll can wait for later. But how much thought has actually been given to the engagement? E.g., we look at the Flockton approach. It was considered to be very good. Are there elements of that there? And in fact, some of those residents are impacted by this as well.
Well, in terms of Richard will talk about that.
So the conditions of the designation are quite specific about some of the consultation that we need to do, and we consider what we're proposing if the report is received by council today for consultation, that this round of consultation will address those requirements. However, like I said, we're actually doing 3 rounds of consultation on this. We did one in the middle of last year, and rather than getting Dr. Turner to go away and write a report without having the community feedback, we added an additional round which sought responses from the community, and that fed into his report and resulted in some of the things probably being in there that may not have been in there. So we've done that. We'll do this round if the report's received today, and if the final report's approved, we'll have another round of consultation with the community. So there will be 3 rounds in total, which is pretty comprehensive, we think.
Just to double check, so the conditions in the designation, but they don't limit us to do it, you know, to go broader, deeper, whatever. They're probably a minimum.
Well, it's quite specific in the designation about what we're required to do, and even totally this round will go beyond it, because some of the conditions of the designation are really saying you just need to engage with those streets which are affected by traffic calming or other methods, plus local community groups, plus schools, plus spokes, plus another few groups.
Right.
So even this round is going above and beyond that. So
okay, it's all good. Thank you.
Yanni.
Thank you. Just had several questions. I just wanted to clarify the kind of sequencing. So just in my mind, so we basically, the motorway's been built, we're committing investment to a whole bunch of roading projects ahead of the future transport business case going to government, which is seeking possibly some sort of rail or light transit high occupancy system for the same corridor. Is that kind of what's happening? So
that the motorway itself is part of the Christchurch RONS, or Roads of National Significance, and 3 main projects: Christchurch Southern Motorway, Western Corridor, Christchurch Northern Corridor. So that was essentially a product of the previous government. Contracts were signed as part of the previous administration and has been delivered on the ground now. Part of the benefit of this particular project is that it would remove vehicles from Main North and Papanui Road, and that enables those routes to be better used for public transport, and that has always been the key public transport route from the north into the city. And you know, one of the problems with having something which is a bus service which might go straight from Kaipo or Rangiora down the Christchurch Northern Corridor into town is that it doesn't pick up any of the key activity centres that Main North and Papanui Road do. So there's Belfast, there's Northlands, there's Merivale. So what that enables us to do by taking the traffic off that route is to focus on those routes being used for what they're intended, which is core public transport. So I don't think there's an issue of inconsistency. One works with the other.
So, okay. And so in regards to the report that we've got, and sorry, it's quite hard to read it with the small text on the iPad and lots of different pages. And I know at our community board, at least, we haven't had a briefing, so we didn't really have a chance to get into detail. But I've tried to find where it references our Christchurch Transport Strategic Plan and our Climate Smart Strategy, and I haven't been able to see it. So I was just wondering if you could tell me how the plan addresses transport plan strategic objectives in 4.11 and 4.12, which is reshaping travel demand to reduce emissions and oil dependence, and investing in green infrastructure and enhancements.
We've actually already said, Yanni, that this is not this report isn't an alternative to other things. It's additional. But I'll leave it to you to answer, Richard. I just felt that you'd already answered.
Right. And the third one that I haven't seen reference, which is in our thing as well, is in our Climate Smart Strategy. We adopted a goal to reduce 50% of greenhouse gas emissions from domestic transport by 2040 from a 2008 baseline. So I was interested in how this management plan will work towards that goal as well. Thanks.
So I think you need to, the Christchurch Transport Strategic Plan needs to be read as a whole, and it was approved in 2012, and it incorporates the Northern Arterial Extension and Cranford Street upgrade. So those projects are consistent and give effect to the Christchurch Transport Strategic Plan. So there isn't an inconsistency there. But it's dangerous to pick out parts of the CTSP and to my mind, and consider that this might be inconsistent with it, because it needs to be read in the round. So, you know, that document does refer to these projects. These projects do deliver on the CTSP, and the great conundrum, if you like, of the Christchurch Northern Corridor has always been, well, where does the traffic go once it hits the Cranford Innes intersection? And that's the purpose of this report. And the commissioners couldn't answer that question, you know, at the hearing, because it wasn't what they were required to consider. So what they did is place specific conditions in the designation decision, which obligated us to do that work, which is what we're doing today. In terms of the wider issues of climate change, etc., you know, it obviously is an issue for this, but again, as I've referred to previously, what this seeks to achieve is taking a lot of traffic off Main North Road and Papanui Road, so you know that becomes a core PT route. There's also a shared user path down the side of the Christchurch Northern Corridor, so it's not just a big motorway. There is a shared user path along it. Part of the agreement that we have with NZTA and WIMAC for the third southbound lane is that if it is going to go in, it will be used for high occupancy vehicle purposes. Again, I'd say that that's consistent with the clauses of the CTSP that you've mentioned, but also that there's a clip-on cycle lane to the WIMAC bridge. And I think in the past we've all gone, well, why would you kind of do that? It's probably too far away, but with the advent of e-bikes and cycle assist bikes, which are, you know, been a real revolution in recent times, the amount of people using those, pedal assist, sorry, you know, it's not too far away for people to be biking from WIMAC to Christchurch City on what will be a route that offers a very high level of service with, you know, basically a shared user path running along the entire length of the Christchurch Northern Corridor. So, yep, the CNC itself raises some issues in terms of the clauses you've referred to, but I think you need to look at it in the round in terms of some of the other things.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it would be good when we get reports to have reference to our strategies and plans. We would normally have that, and how these things align or how they...
This has been generated as a result of a resource consent
I know,
requirement.
but there's still a staff report attached to it. So the other thing that it's quite silent on, which does seem a bit puzzling, is the effects associated with the central city plan. I couldn't find any reference to the blueprint, the accessible city plan, and the idea that we're trying to slow traffic, reduce traffic coming into the central city through this management plan. So sorry if I've missed it, but it just seemed to me kind of a fundamental point about what happens along the avenues, for example, with all this traffic, and it doesn't seem to be being addressed through here in an accessible plan.
That chapter of the Christchurch Central Recovery Plan does look to reduce the number of vehicles coming into the central city that don't have a place there. But a number of the vehicles that will be coming in along the Christchurch Northern Corridor may very well be people or commuters coming in from Waimak who are working in the central city. That's not the only location where they work, obviously, and that's one of the reasons why we need to consider park and ride and Waimak, but we also need to consider those other mechanisms where we're doing the work on the PT Futures, where we're doing the work on the cycleways. So, but once they hit the corridors themselves, there is kind of thinking within the Christchurch Central Recovery Plan about how those corridors manage, and at some stage into the future, there's probably going to need to be some work. Not solely because of this, but the corridors do carry a significant amount of traffic, about how they can be managed appropriately through less interference from traffic going across them, so that the key routes can be
Sorry, but as part of this management plan, it seems to stop the traffic at Beeley Ave and doesn't seem to address what happens along Barbados and Madras Street once you cross over Beeley Ave.
The requirements, sorry, Yanni, the requirements of the resource consent are about the impacts, the downstream impacts. So I just...
That is a downstream, that's a huge downstream impact.
Can I just clarify
at what happens to the traffic when it comes across Beeley Ave?
Addressed this, that Beeley Ave and also Innistrobe West were out of scope for this work, but our board has requested some work to be done around both of those areas to feed back into this. So we did, am I right there, Mike? We requested a traffic survey. Well, not to this meeting, no, but to this process. Oh, did you expect it to be ready now?
So is there basically a map that says we will not consider traffic effects beyond Beeley Ave?
No.
I mean, if that's fine, that's...
No. I mean, but the key thing with Madras and Barbados, those are the key, that one-way pair is the key, one of the key one-way pairs where we encourage vehicles to use. That's what they're there for, and that's what that's the message we've put out to people who are wanting to come in and go through the central city in vehicles, is to use the one-way pairs.
Sorry, our whole plan for the central city, the government's plan, was to put the traffic around the 4 avenues and slow traffic down within the 4 Avs. That was the key part of the accessible city plan.
Traffic that didn't have a destination within the central city was supposed to go around and use the 4 avenues. Traffic that did have a destination in the central city, the idea was that we'd maximise the potential from the one-way pairs, and they would use those because they are simply the most efficient routes to get into the central city. And that will continue to be the case.
I mean, it just seems to me that there's a huge community in there that have had almost no engagement around this project, that are going to have a huge, significant adverse impact on.
Well, can I add something there? Like when we did the modelling, we were looking at comparing a future with the CNC, which we're obviously going to get because they're building it, and a future without the CNC. So what would have happened anyway? And what the modelling indicates is that most of the major changes are obviously close to the Innes Cranford intersection. We're concentrating traffic that's going down Marshlands, Main North Papanui Road, onto this corridor, so it's moving traffic across. So once you get down to Beeley Ave, even if you hadn't built the CNC, you're still going to get the effects of traffic growth from people coming in from the north. So the modelling indicates that the effects on Beeley Ave and south of Beeley Ave wouldn't be too different to what would have occurred if the CNC wasn't built. Now you can argue that the model hasn't thought about induced demand, that you might get more trips because it's easier to get into town, and you can make an argument on that. But generally what the assessment has shown is that once you get to Beeley Ave and south of it, the effects won't be any different because you built the
Okay,
CNC.
thanks. And just the final question is, you talked about the idea that we build the Northern Corridor, we build the downstream network to cope with the increased traffic. That frees up traffic along Main North Road and Papanui Road, where we're going to look at the alternative things. So I just want to, do we have any evidence that when we build motorways and do widen roads, that it displaces traffic from other corridors? Like, where's the evidence that shows that that would happen? What's the modelling show in terms of, you know, I just think of places like Brougham Street, Morehouse Ave, or Blenheim Road, Southern Motorway. Have we got any evidence that shows that that's a likely outcome?
I wasn't privy to all the, I'm not a modeller, and I wasn't privy to the modelling that was done as part of the designation approval, but it did go through independent commissioners and then went through the Environment Court, and my understanding was that it did predict reduced traffic levels on Marshlands and Main North and Papanui Road.
And those modelling exercises were peer-reviewed by other modellers, so
right.
They went through a very robust process.
But we haven't looked historically at like what's happened when we've built a motorway and what happens to the traffic. Like, we don't have any real life sort of examples of what's happened in terms of what was predicted and what's happened with motorways.
It is actually very difficult to take an example from somewhere else and apply it because the conditions are so different and the road network's so different. So, and it's, you know, in terms of this exercise, no, we haven't gone and looked at other projects of this type in New Zealand or elsewhere.
It does reinforce the importance of travel demand management, though. I mean, it really does, because, I mean, getting people off the roads, I mean, build it and they will come as a truism only when you speak about motorways and bridges. Mike?
Thank you. Just on your report, you identify that the clearways down Christchurch Street and all that will actually create a greater risk for people that bike down there at times of use?
Well, my recommendation in the report is to encourage cyclists to use alternative routes, and that's part of the, obviously we've got the Papanui Parallel facility, which is an excellent facility that they can use as an alternative, and I'm suggesting some other secondary routes.
Yeah.
But yes, the during the times the clearway is in operation, because of the width of the lane, it will only be suitable for confident cyclists that feel comfortable cycling with traffic.
Okay. And what part of your solutions, as well as encouraging to obviously use the Papanui Parallels, to look at a cycleway to the east of Cranford Street, but that's in stage 3. So there'll be a period of time where if we put clearways down there, that actually, if someone bikes down there, they're going to be at greater risk than what they are currently biking down there.
Well, I suppose the reason why I felt that could be delayed is because we've got the Papanui Parallel in place, so there's already a good parallel cycle facility. Over time, obviously, the volumes of traffic using the corridor will increase and the number of cyclists will increase, and that's why I think a secondary route on the other side is required. Yeah, the sooner, I suppose, that can be put in, the better, but obviously it's a matter of prioritising what needs to be done first.
Yeah, and I totally get that we want to try and encourage people to use our cycleways, and a lot of people will use them, but then there will be the commuters that are a bit more confident, and they'll take the most direct route, and they have every right to take the most direct route, and they'll go down Cranford Street. And I'm just a bit concerned about what the potential outcome of that could be.
Well, as we talked about at the Community Board, of course, to actually accommodate that, we have to widen the road, and then that has a knock-on effect in terms of people getting in and out of their driveways, so we have to actually widen the road reserves. So, like, there's lots of examples around Australasia where a route needs to be prioritised for a particular mode. So particularly if you look at Melbourne, they have the smart roads concept where they have these network management plans that they develop, and they have a route that is the key route for cyclists, a route that's the key route for vehicles or public transport, because they know in some of these corridors they can't accommodate all the different modes.
I don't think that would really be in line with the government's GPS on transport, where they tried to go for mode neutrality and safe system. And obviously a focus on active transport, where we suddenly say, actually, you can bike down there, but it's dangerous.
Yeah, Pauline.
Just quickly, Dr. Turner, I see you have a pedestrian refuge suggested for Cranford Street around English Park area to get people across there. And
the signalised crossing.
Signalised
Yep.
crossing. Sorry, I apologise. So, does that not seem a little bit of a oxymoron, really, or a paradox? Will that not cause the traffic to impact and back up there and congest there? They have to stop, and it'll actually prevent Cranford Street from flowing freely, and therefore encourage people to wreck run with it?
Well, that's why it needs further investigation to see what effect it would have in terms of causing congestion, but obviously traffic signals can be set up so they're coordinated, so that you, in terms of a green wave through there. So it really requires that more detailed modelling, which I've suggested also south of Berwick Street, in terms of which routes you treat in terms of clearways or upgrade. I think that needs a level of modelling, a different modelling type of tool than the one that we used for this study. And so I can't, that's why I suggested it's looked at rather than say that it should be going in, is that it needs to be investigated first, because if it's going to cause that congestion, then it might have quite a negative effect.
So more work to be done on that. And just one for Richard, if the feedback from the community was to identify any things in this here that they wanted to be brought forward, we would have the power to look at that. For example, safer cycleways in a shorter period time frame than a later. So say stage 1 rather than stage 3. That would all be a potential council decision.
That's correct, and that's the purpose of going out to engage with the community, is to hear some of the things such as the issues that were just raised before, and you know, we can recommend those things be brought forward or pushed out.
Good. So in terms of the time that we have before the lunch adjournment, we have 20 minutes. So I've had an indication from Sarah that she would like to speak and that she would like to move an additional recommendation. Do I have a mover and a seconder? I mean, I'm happy to move it if that would assist the meeting. I'll move it, and seconded by Aaron. Right.
Sorry, I just had one additional question, which was the point that was raised.
Sorry. You what?
I just had an additional question in response to what Mike asked. It's very quick.
Well, I was just about to open it up to debate.
Right,
We're going to have to conclude the debate after lunch now.
It's a very quick question. I just wanted, one of the senators talked about engaging with central government and the local MP, so I just wondered if we'd done that.
What we're seeking today is your approval to engage on this.
Right, so it's been moved and seconded. Sarah, you have an additional recommendation?
That's right, just that we actually start engagement with the community on the wider impacts of the increased traffic to inform the further mitigation works, so that stage 2 work. And that engagement might end up taking place at the same time as the other, but it's slightly different work.
Does anyone have a problem with that approach? Because if that's generally accepted round the table, then I'm happy to accept that as part of the resolution and not move it as an amendment. Is that all right, Aaron? Everyone else comfortable? All right, so we'll include that as part of the resolution. Thank you, Sarah. What?
I've got an amendment as well I'd like to put forward.
Okay.
For request staff to provide a public briefing to the affected community boards on the travel demand management options. I've send it to Joe.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It actually doesn't sound like it would be problematic either.
Yeah.
I mean, just for the sake of moving process.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if this is about a public briefing with the two community boards and the wider public, then in relation to the traffic demand management, we would have to ask NZTA and Waimakariri District Council and potentially ECAN as well to be part of that. But that might be a really good thing to do so that people can see the interplay between the different agencies and how that all comes together in this downstream effects.
Ask a question of the second resolution in terms of starting engagement with community and wider impacts of increased traffic. Is that in relation to stage 2, the stage 2 stuff?
Yeah,
In the report?
which I understood we were doing anyway.
So that's what we're doing?
Yeah.
So we're already doing that by putting the report out there, and if people don't like stage 1...
So that was more about engaging with the community on where they go, how they go, not just doing a desktop or someone sending counting people.
Okay, well, can we just
talk to the community, doing mapping kind of thing?
Can we tidy up the wording so it's clear? Request staff to...
Those are the stuff, yeah.
Yeah, to work... It's kind of like work with the community on mapping movements so that it's aligned. I mean, I don't know, can you find some words that would...
I think it's probably to do with the monitoring as much as anything, so we might need a minor change to the report to reflect that, if the council's comfortable with that, and then we can use the report as the basis to engage on that matter. So yes, yeah. I think we
we get lots of information on where the traffic goes. We don't have the pedestrian stuff yet. How people move around the community, not just to the activity centres, but to the parks, all of that kind of... where they go, how they get there, how they would like to go. Yeah.
So it's about local access rather than the broader...
not through movement stuff.
Yeah. So help me with some words, please, quickly.
Okay, staff to work with...
I don't know, work with the local communities around local access needs. It's just, it's a generic statement, but I understand what Sarah's saying.
Yeah, I think we understand it as well, so
yeah.
If I can give you our assurance that we'll deliver on that.
Yeah, okay.
It's all around...
And I'll send some stuff, yeah.
To my mind, it's all around knowing the origin and destination of pedestrian and cycle trips, like we do for motor vehicle trips.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and if we were able to, the thing is, if we know that stuff beforehand rather than waiting for assessing it till after it's opened, then we can. It's cheaper to gate those impacts while we're doing the initial work than it is to try and do it later.
Yeah. Okay.
And much better and less disruptive for the community.
All right. Well, look. As I say, I have to adjourn the meeting at 1 o'clock. Right. So we've got 15 minutes before lunch, and we'll conclude the debate after lunch. So, and I just want to comment briefly at the outset, having moved the motion, and that is to simply say that this is what happens when a sequence of events begins a long time ago, and an incoming council and a current community have to address the downstream effects of something that's already been decided and underway. In 2012, the council adopted the Christchurch Transport Strategic Plan, which included the Northern Arterial Extension and the Cranford Street upgrade. And it was at that point that there was no going back. The government of the day decided to proceed with the motorway extension, essentially, and the link point was made. The decision was made that it would be Cranford Street. Would that be a decision I would make today? No. Would it be a decision? Would I make a decision to increase access for vehicle traffic in from the north into the city? No, I wouldn't have approved that either. but it wasn't a series of decisions that we were involved in. It was part of the roads of national significance. It was a plan that was put in place, and we have the impact of that we're dealing with today. But it's not an immediate impact. It's the impact begins in 2020, next year, and that's why I actually want to support the resolution, and I do so with respect to the community that have come, but I think it's more important to get out and talk to the community about all of these things to get the feedback. We've already seen that there's been some changes. I'm sure there will be further changes again as this process develops. The final sign-off won't happen for some time yet, but it does look as if some work needs to happen before the final, it needs to happen ahead of the 2020 situation. Others can wait until we actually see the actual impacts and are able to retrofit or continue to monitor to ensure all that we can do to mitigate the effects. It's the demand management that is the key to this, and if we don't actually get people out of their single occupancy vehicles and onto public transport, then the whole premise that this was ever designed on simply fails. So that is a real challenge not only to the Christchurch City Council but to ECAN, NZTA and the Waimakariri District Council to work hand in glove to make sure that that happens. So, Pauline.
Yeah, I totally endorse that. And I wonder if this previous government had been elected earlier, that this might not have happened either. And because the whole GPS has got a totally different view on transport, so it's kind of like just a little bit late. But I will support receiving this report because it allows the community another opportunity to reinforce their views. They've asked us to think long term, to think sustainably, to think beyond the car, and how can we reduce the vehicle numbers. So these are big challenges the community is putting before us, and I think we need to be up to sorting those challenges out and using this as an opportunity. St Albans community has always been strongly environmentally concerned, and this is actually a big rat we're asking them to swallow here. It's coming right through the community. It's very, very upsetting for everybody. And it's going to have massive adverse impacts on the environment, on their amenity, on their economy and on their safety. It's all from something that they've always opposed vehemently. It goes right back to the previous option in the 60s. And it's contrary also to the environmental principles. We've got quite a few key activity areas. We've got Cranford Innes, we've got Westminster Innes, Westminster Barbados, Edgeware Barbados and Edgeware Village itself, which will all could be adversely affected if we don't manage this properly. There are some suggestions in Dr. Turner's report, and thank you for the work on this. I think it's pretty good. I think you've captured the community views pretty well in here too. But there's some that I support, particularly the bringing forward of the cycle lanes that you've suggested. I think we need those anyway, even now. Cycling down Edgeware Road and Westminster Street west of Cranford is quite frightening too. The HOV, that's reliant on NZTA, but we need to get in behind that. And the park and ride coming forward to QE2, I hope we hear from the community that they've already expressed that view to me. So yes, we have a problem, and I'm going to call it a problem. It's foisted upon us. We have to mitigate this as a result of someone else's decision. Before due diligence was done on where and how it would feed into the Christchurch city. But look, we need to work really closely now with a very activated community, an intelligent community, to ensure our very best to deliver what is best for them and the area and the Christchurch city. And we must consider any final decisions with the community well-being and amenity right up there in priority of importance. And just reminding Richard, please, if we get that memo around the sub-regional travel demand management NZTA work to the community boards, so we can feed that back to community groups if they have any opportunity to feed into that, because that's a perfect opportunity. So thank you.
Yeah, Sarah?
Thank you for that. Just going back to the resolution, while we've ended up changing the wording just down to access, And the whole report's about access and mobility. I'd quite like to change, we'll just add a couple of words that just, and any wider impacts.
We're in the debate,
just like,
Sarah. We're in the debate.
That's right. So as Councillor Cotter just mentioned, it's more than just about access. It's about the well-being needs of the community as well, and the amenity. And so while we need to address the community needs, understanding how a community operates is more than about what they access and how they access it. And so I'm really hoping that any work that we do will address those wider impacts on the community, to assess those impacts, and actually that we put some funding on at some point to allow some work to happen on those.
Thank you. Phil.
Thank you. I'm very glad that we have this report, but I'm also really glad that the community have come to talk with us today, and they gave us a very clear message with their petition. And I think in a way too, while in fact there are a whole lot of groups, and Leanne referred to all of the different parts of this, council part, there's also the NZTA part, I think there's particularly the community board role, and I think this is a big challenge for the community board involved. I think the truth is, overall, and I'm not blaming anybody, the ball has been dropped and we need to pick it up, and it's especially in keeping contact with the local people. So I think this should be a way forward, and I will certainly support the recommendations.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Oh, sorry, well no one else had put their hand up. Sorry, Glenn, Yanni, Mike.
I won't be long. Look, apologies, Dr. Turner, for talking about you in the third person. Just a brain lapse there, I'm sorry about that. I like a lot of the report. I just do diverge page 304, just communication with the residents. My preferred approach would be a step back, where we work with residents to design the actual engagement from there. I think this strikes me as a case of a stitch in time saves 9. The more we can do at the front end, the better. So that would be my approach right along the IAP2 spectrum, get people in from the get-go for a greater chance of success with the outcome. We're dealing with essentially a big pipe squeezing down into a small pipe. Whatever decisions have been done, contracts done are done, the whole thing's happening. So I think, yeah, let's just get cracking. But get people involved, get the residents to design. Is it one of those co-create things that we talk about?
Yanni.
I really can't receive this report today. I think, you know, there has been a lot of work go into it, but it just seems really bizarre that for something as significant as this, we haven't even had a workshop or a briefing as a full council on it. This was a decision that council made, and I think this highlights the frustration with this process, where in public we consulted as part of an annual plan, and we had submissions from the community against it. We made the decision to reduce the funding and defer it so that we could look at a coordinated approach, and unfortunately a few months later, and public excluded, we put the funding back on. So I think the public have struggled to understand how this council has made decisions over this project, and that's really, really unfair, and I think, you know, it does question the role of democracy in our decision making. I accept that there's going to be traffic coming in with the northern motorway, but at the time that we reduced the funding previously, we got a memo saying that this was to benefit the commuters in the North Waimakariri area of the city or the region, and it was for their benefit that a lot of these improvements are being made. So I could see no problem with actually just having the motorway come into QE2 Drive, see what happens with the traffic, and then look at what mitigations. I don't believe that we should be spending the amount of money that we're spending on this now at the same time as we're looking at other alternative methods of public transport, high occupancy vehicles coming into the city from the north. It seems very bizarre to me that we would try and take traffic off Martians Road and try and put it through places like St Albans and even into the residential areas within Beeley Ave, like Barbados and Madras Street. So I can't receive this report today. I think it falls short on a number of areas that I think would be really important for us to understand, and that is, how does it impact on our climate smart strategy and our Greater Christchurch Transport Strategic Plan. And, you know, at the end of the day, we are receiving this report, being asked to receive it as councillors. We have a number of policies and things that we've agreed to do and targets, and yet we don't seem to have any reference to those in this report, and I think that's a shortcoming. I also think that we cannot divorce this from the Central City Plan, the accessible city plan for the 4 AVs, this just seems so counterproductive, where we spend millions of dollars, $400 million in the 4Avs, trying to slow down traffic, remove parking, and make it better for people to live, and at the same time we're spending $100 million increasing traffic coming in. It just seems bizarre. So I won't support this today. I think more work needs to be done. I'd much rather see that work done before we're being asked to receive anything.
Yeah, Mike.
Thank you. It's not going to be that good. Look, I'd like to acknowledge the community for showing up today and the petition that has been presented. Everything that was said I agree with, and I've agreed with it for a long time. I've been saying the same comments. I'd also like to acknowledge Councillor Johansson as the only councillor that opposed the Northern Arterial Extension and Cranford Street upgrade last term, and in my opinion, at a time that was the last opportunity for us to actually stop the motorway. And look, I'm aware of the extreme amount of pressure that was applied at the time from the previous government, but that was, in my opinion, the last opportunity we had. I do not support the Northern Corridor, and I never have. It is old school transport thinking that doesn't give a damn about the communities it will destroy, all in an effort to make it easier for cars to get in and out of Christchurch. There is tens of millions of ratepayers' dollars being spent on our roads, and for what? To divide a community, to make it unsafe for the community and give quicker travel times for Waimakariri residents. And the last time I looked, they weren't paying rates to us. Anyone who says that this is for the greater benefit of Christchurch does not value community. Many of the options outlined in this management plan will only encourage more use of the Northern Corridor and will also put vulnerable road users at greater risk. If we make it easier on the main routes, the cars will come. We need to focus on reducing vehicles using Cranford Street as the way in and out of Christchurch. We need to investigate all options: park and ride, congestion levies, PET, HOV lanes and rail. This needs to be front and centre and needs to be in place before the corridor is completed and needs to be more visible to the public. It is very clear to me that had the South Inners Road been part of the corridor project right from the start, the whole project would not have got off the ground, and it is my opinion that this is the reason why it wasn't. Now as it gets closer, everyone is starting to realise what many of us knew, that this will just give bad outcomes. While today is the receipt of this plan, and there are still a number of steps to go before any individual project is approved, I've decided to make a principled decision and vote against receiving the report on the fact that I steadfastly oppose what the Northern Corridor is going to do to the communities south of Inners Road.
So I'll just wrap up the debate. I am also opposed to the idea of building motorways to facilitate cars coming into the city. I think it's a crazy, crazy decision. I never supported the roads of national significance when I was a Member of Parliament, and I don't support them now. The current government, I think Pauline hit the nail on the head when she said if the current government had been the government of the day, then I don't believe that we would even be having this debate in relation to what has occurred. The truth is that the Northern Corridor was a fait accompli from 2012 onwards. And yes, councillors can move a resolution on the day, the final day of an annual plan or an LTP being signed off, and say, I move that we remove all the funding from the budget for work that has already been committed and which other agencies have relied on. So, and it doesn't work like that. I mean, that was a motion that was carried by one person, so I don't think that it is fair to suggest for 1 minute that people put things back on and took a courageous stand against something that was too late. It was far too late. And the truth is that if we don't mitigate against the downstream effects, and if we don't allow the community the opportunity to engage as fully as we possibly can, and the community board went out with an early engagement to alert people to the issue. I mean, in many respects, that's why we've had the petition today, because people have been far more aware of what's going on than perhaps with some of the other projects that sometimes people tell us we didn't even know that there was an engagement going on. So this is the beginning of another step in this process, but it isn't the end of the matter, and the community is going to be properly engaged in this whole process. But I'm really going to stand up for what is an unfortunate reality, which is when one set of, when a government changes and a new set of priorities arrive, exactly the same thing happens when a council changes and a new set of priorities arise, or if they don't have the opportunity to change the direction, then that is the situation that we're left in. So on that, I will put the motion. All those, sorry? One separately. I'll put number 1. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. Yeah, so that's Yanni, Tim, Dion, Mike. And I will put the balance of the recommendations. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. I will adjourn the meeting until